The countdown stream is live. Yes, the thing just jumped up. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are 2 o'clock on the spot. Really glad to be doing this one. Seems like everybody in the industry is talking about AI, and we are going to talk about it today, but maybe through a slightly different lens than some of the other conversations you're in. But my name is Chris Cline. I'm the executive director of the Agents Council for Technology, ACT. One of the programs that the National Big I offers member agents and brokers, and does so only through collaboration and support with amazing companies who've really chosen to invest in the long game and try to have a technology conversation based on helping agents and brokers and really the industry at large understand issues, opportunities that are presented to us via technology, and want to just have these conversations to help everybody think about what they're supposed to be thinking about. And with
we're
that,
gonna do that today. Yes,
we're going to do just that.
We're going to do that today.
So speaking of those amazing partners who are really invested in this for the long haul, Margeaux, give us a little bit about you.
Hi guys, Margeaux Giles. If you're not sick of seeing my face already, I know I kind of am on LinkedIn. I am the CEO of IRYS Insurtech, and we are, and I hate to say the acronym that no one likes to hear, so I'm going to plug my ears, but we are the new AMS on the block, really redefining what that means. And I'm happy to be here with you, Chris. I know AI is always at the forefront. It's probably the most asked question we get. Even if it's out of context. And so I think we're going to talk about that a little bit today, but happy to join, and been a member of the Big I for like 15 years as an agent. So I appreciate it. And I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I think that's a good context. And I'm assuming with you, there was some intent in mentioning that. But yeah, you come from within the independent agent ranks. You were, well, I suppose you still are one, but yeah.
I am. I'm still a licensed CSR. I did not let my 440 in Florida lapse. So technically, yeah, still part of the tribe. And still part owner in agencies and things like that. So yeah, very much still entrenched.
In Florida too. Yeah. So yeah.
In all the places. Yeah. Florida.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
I just like that, right? Because, we've, continued to kind of see an influx. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, more than an influx, a tsunami of new technology solutions, and really getting right-sized on the ones that are focused on solving very real problems for agents and carriers, and how they, intersect each other to provide better value to customers. But having somebody leading the charge for a new and innovative way of thinking about it, who's actually done the job and been there and kind of fought the fight, those are great stories. So, kudos to you.
Yeah, it's a different perspective. And I think it's different than what people are used to seeing. Although I am hopeful, this generation, I don't know what we should call it. We should come up with like a generation name for the people that have been in insurance, that are in like their late 30s, right? We're still kind of the millennials. We're still, we remember the floppy disks and the tricolored carbon copy paper and the snail mail, but we're also, still using the iPhone and still interested in AI. So there's a bridge there, but there's a lot of agents and even distribution in general, people that are of our age and time frame that are moving into tech now. And it's a good time. It feels like you can kind of feel the buzz of people asking, what is AI and how do I use it? And I think this is something new we've seen, especially in the retail and captive agent space in general. So it's kind of an exciting time to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll leave the whole generational labeling aside for when
I like the ones that straddle. We straddle. We're not quite, we're not youngins, but we're still embracing the technology. I think there's quite a few of us out there now.
Yeah, well, let's dive in here a little bit. And I think you guys have the attendees today. Thank you for doing this, whether you're live or whether it's on Memorex, which I guess dates me at least on, back when cassette tapes and 8-tracks ruled the world. But there is an opportunity to put a chat or a question out there. Please feel free to comment along the way. Push back, challenge, ask a question about anything that we're exploring today, and we'll try to address it. If we can't, by all means, please reach out to Margeaux and or I, through our social media channels or our organizations, and we'll do our best to have conversation to help support these things. But the categorize or the title of this is reframing the question, why do I need, or what AI do I need? And when we were brainstorming this, it's something that's become thematic for us at ACT this year, because it seems like more and more we're getting asked, what AI do I need in my agency? And it might be a little bit naive to think about, but I come from a perspective, I think across all tech, even before AI was the conversation of the day. And let's just stop and think about whether a technology implementation or change is actually what you should be thinking about. I'm a big advocate for people and process as a part of that three-legged school of people, process, and technology. And so what we've been trying to think about is, how can we reframe the question? Are we asking the right questions? And maybe AI is exactly what an organization needs, but maybe not. And I would love to just stop there. I mean, you're leading a newer organization, out, sort of on the tip of the spear a little bit. So that might seem a little counterintuitive to you, but I don't think it is.
No. And I think the topic of this is perfect, because the question is not what AI, it's really, what problem are you trying to solve? And even deeper than what problem are you trying to solve, this is the steps that we use when I go through this process. Okay, what problem are you trying to solve? But even more importantly, what is your strategy as a company? And that's, you can ask people that question, and it seems like one of those cookie cutter questions, like, tell me your business plan. But it's a difficult question for a lot of people to answer. And, because there's a lot. What does strategy mean? Are you talking about my sales strategy? Are you talking about my personnel strategy, my HR strategy? And my answer to that is yes, all of that, right? Because AI is a tool like any other tool in your tool belt. And it can do, really, we're in the time now, it can do whatever you need it to do. Technology can do what you need it to do. The hardest part is figuring out what is it that you want it to do? And then the deeper question is why? And does that align with your company strategy? And I think that's the first question I would ask. And I don't know how you feel about that, Chris, but to me, that is the core of it.
Yeah, unless, I've had this conversation on some of these other webinars and at different events around, the industry. And I feel like there might be a chance to go just a little deeper in the types of things that we think or believe that an organization should be thinking about. So to provide some applicability to this somewhat esoteric concept, like you just said, what is a strategy? I want to double in size. Well,
yeah.
And so some of the things that come to my mind, and I'll share a couple of these, because I do think it is critically important to have some of this down on paper and operationalized and socialized among your staff, so that should technology be a choice, or when you choose to make a technology decision, it really kind of points back to enabling those things. And so I think about truly appreciate how big you are, have very real expectations about how big you can become over the next 3 to 5 years. Multiple locations, is that in multi-states, or it's kind of just a 3-county adjacency? How many employees do you want? What's your mix
kind of
of
business do you want to write? Are you trying to move into a different vertical? Do you have a program you want to spin up? There's all of those are all strategy questions. And a lot of times I think agency owners will point to the outcome. And I think you just glazed over it, but it was perfect. It was like, well, I want to double in size. That's an outcome of a strategy. That's not the strategy, right? So there's many things that you would want to put in place before you even discuss the outcome. Or you can work backwards. If you say, okay, we want to double in size, well, how do we get there? And you work back to the strategy. But I'm like a firm believer in this. And I think we've discussed internally, I know in my experience, a lot of agency owners started out as sales representatives, right? They're great salespeople. They built a really great book of business. It got large. They turned it into an agency. That is a very common story. And that's fantastic. And it drives a phenomenal sales organization, but it doesn't always lend itself to the best, business org structuring, right? So a lot of times we as salespeople, and myself is included in here, we look to doubling in size or growing into a state or adding a line of business. And we think of those as strategy. And a lot of times the operational needs of how to support that fall by the wayside. And what's crazy about that is that's really where AI, in my opinion, is going to give you the biggest boost. I mean, there's always going to be sales tools, and sales is great. And we all know that AI can be used in that regard as well. But I think where agents are not understanding is the operational efficiency that AI can bring. And that to me is as I look through all of our implementations, and we ask this question during our implementations as well to make sure we're aligning right to our clients, it's a lot of the business ops strategy that is missing in the larger picture. And if you're going to use a tool, that's really where you want to hone in on what is it that you're going to do operationally to support a strategy of expansion. And that's where I want to put the AI tool,
Yeah, well, let's just use that as a place to, to just kind of launch into that. Because I think you're right. And it's certainly not intended to be punitive. But I do think, especially in smaller to mid-sized agencies, your observation that many of the folks leading them are leading them because they were one of the stronger salespeople in that organization, and grow is an important thing. And in a world where even some of the best practice data shows that agencies are pretty profitable still, and want to be thinking about romantic and new exciting ways to make their business differentiate, it can seem maybe just a little less enthusiastic to focus
on sexy.
It's not sexy. To go into the core. But you think about you think about building the foundation, and the cheesy analogies, you're probably not going to put an addition on a home unless the current structure is sound and stable and those types of things, and make sure your home's in order. And so I think personally, and I even think that the AI will the AI was oh my gosh, I'm one of those. I apologize. Rewind. Artificial intelligence will solve internal operational efficiencies or create solutions there much sooner than it will have a real meaningful impact on some of the stuff out on the fringes. And I would go so far to say is we might actually see that with our carrier friends before or at a grander scale sooner than how it can impact the agent and broker on them.
I think to kind of dig into the why are we talking about operations? It's an AI thing. Why are we talking about business ops? If you think about the first use cases that came with ChatGPT 3.5, whatever it was, 3.5, when that came to the market and it was widely available to the masses, because I mean, most of us have been in the tech industry for a while. No, AI has been around forever. It's not new. Carriers and underwriters have been utilizing some form of machine learning and AI for a very, very long time. But now it's made its way to sort of mainstream. And if you think about it, the first use cases were very sales driven. And it was like, oh, we're going to put a Gen Chat, ChatGPT wrapper on our website, and people can ask it questions and write. And my first thought was like, wow, that's stripping the humanity out of the process of where you really want the human to be the most involved. So if I am a trusted advisor, is it in my best interest to automate the trusted advisor part of my job, right? So if you think about these first use cases that came out with ChatGPT, it was like, oh, we're going to automate this whole process of, they'll enter their info and they'll get a quote and they'll bind it, and then they could do all the stuff on their own. I'm like, wait, hold on. But where is as an agent, where are you providing value in that entire process that you've just described? And I think this is going to be indicative of AI in the future, which is we're going to see the pendulum swings. I always talk about the pendulum. There's always this back and forth until we find that middle ground. And right now, everything is AI, everything is automation, everything is, tech. I think you're going to see the humanity and the human touch become the commodity. And I think that will actually be the differentiator between, the good agencies and the great agencies. And that's not to say they're not going to use AI. I just see the AI being more of something that takes the repetitive, task-driven activities away to allow for a CSR. And I'm not even talking about a sales rep, but even a customer service rep to develop a human relationship in the time when a consumer, which we know from JD Power and Associates, and there's tons of studies out there that the actual clients are rejecting the AI right now. They don't want to interface when they have a claim with a chat bot. They want to talk to a human about their home policy now that they've been canceled 3 times or they're being non-renewed and they don't understand why their premium's gone up 60%. These are the times when clients don't want to interact with AI. They want to interact with the human. And if we're spending all of our human capital doing things that AI could be doing, to me, that's a mismanagement of the tool in general. So that, to me, it was just an interesting thing when I saw it come out, this rush to replace the agent by agents, to replace the agent with AI, as opposed to going to that operational place of excellence and looking for the tool there.
Yeah, so and there's a question from Lance out there about how do you get staff to use it with fear, and I think these conversations go really well together. And so I really appreciate what you've said there, and we've all kind of probably read around some generational nuances and everything, and even embracing technology now. There's still something in the younger generations as buyers and employees that when things get funky,
they want to talk to a person.
They want to talk to a human being. And so thinking about Lance's question and how to think about operational areas where AI can make a very meaningful impact is, how do you take the mundane and the routine and some of these more benign tasks that we all know are less enjoyable, and leverage technology to support your staff there so that the staff can actually really add value where a human can add value? And so some examples, early examples, and I would love to hear you kind of build upon these. And certainly in trying to eliminate areas where we have to duplicate entry. And we've been talking about that really since the first part of my career, and it's mind-numbing that we still are talking about it, but I do think we're probably as close to something that can make a meaningful dent in that as we've ever been, and artificial intelligence will be a meaningful driver in that. But some of the things, like your renewals come in and somebody has to look at especially larger commercial lines or whatever, where you're looking at a renewal for what terms have changed, have the inside limits changed. You can use an AI tool to kind of scrub that and then to red flag things. So now a human being can come back rather than reading page after page after page.
Yes.
They can talk about the things that are meaningful.
That's a really great example of an operational AI that necessarily isn't going to be customer facing, but can still, because I know at least in our agencies, and I've talked to so many, that is policy checking. That is fully manual today. Almost everywhere and anybody you talk to, there's somebody who, if they have the luxury of having someone on staff who's checking renewals and reading that policy language. But the reality is those policy docs, they change year to year. There's exclusions, there's new, language within different clauses, and it could change, and it could have a significant change even in personal lines, but a ton in commercial lines. Like, thinking of one that we found the other day in our agency. If you're digging underground more than 3 feet, it used to be 10 feet. Now it's 3 feet. Well, we only caught that because we read the policy docs. That wasn't something that was, and now all of a sudden, 40% of the people in this carrier are now ineligible for this policy we've written. Like, that's real, operational, things that agency owners and managers are constantly worried about. So that's the kind of stuff that keeps us up at night. And there are now, I've seen a few AI providers where you can feed those policy docs in. They can look at them year over year. But I think this is going to get us to a point which, I feel very strongly about, which is, well, you can't do compare and contrast, and you can't really utilize AI if you didn't have last year's policy documents. So, there's going to be a curve here where we have to talk about the type of data that you're collecting. Is it right? Data stewardship is going to become a huge thing if you're thinking about using AI in your agency. It's great. You implement this tool. Yes, I can do policy checking. Renewal comes in and you're like, where are the renewal docs? Oh, I guess I'll go to the carrier and get it. You know what I'm saying? So like,
Yep.
There's a lot of pre-planning process that goes into it. And one of the first things you got to think about is, where are you at today with your data? How much are you collecting? Is it what you need? I get asked a lot of times, like, hey, can we run this really great report? I had a conversation this morning. There's a recall on a vehicle, and I want to run a report that says, show me every policy holder with, these limits in this state that has an F-150 that's under the recall. And I'm like, well, do you have vehicles in your management system? Like, no. And I'm like, well, I don't know. You can't, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're not collecting that kind of data, then you can't enact and you can't utilize AI in that way either. So before we even talk about that, we have to go back and say, and be a little brutally honest and a little realistic about, are you actually collecting and being responsible with the data that you have at your fingertips today, so that you can feed this, tool that you want to use tomorrow? I think that's really important to touch on.
Yeah, there's almost two.
It's a lot there.
There's a lot here, but there's a couple of swim lanes emerging in the chat too. And by all means, thank you all for taking time to throw some thoughts out. So Claire asked about tools to compare policy to policy. There are agencies that are out there using that. And what I think, and I would probably strongly recommend not using any free versions of what's available out there.
Data privacy is a very important thing.
That's just the overarching thing. But in a private version where you can create your own walls in framework, policy language to policy language, you're not really putting any customer information out there, and you're asking for sort of like A/B comparisons, or you're asking a machine to take this document and to answer a specific question about it.
So a lot of them right now, so like what's on the market right now that's, I think, more readily available would be you can query a document. So meaning like you can upload the policy docs and you can ask it specific questions. I've seen some that will do the comparison, although it's not quite as robust and they're not as available as some of those. Right now, if you wanted to maybe upload both, and like you still have to prompt the AI at this point, at least for most of the tools that are out there today. So, you're not just going to upload two things and it's going to give you this like great, output. And you can do that, but that requires training. So, and that's the other important thing people need to realize, is that a lot of these tools, even though they're available, still require, expertise, knowledge, and training on how to get the correct outcome. And that we all saw that with ChatGPT, right? Like we could, the way you prompt AI has a very direct correlation to the type of information you get out of it. So if you're looking for comparison to comparison docs, you would probably need that tool upload both, and you'd have to specifically ask and be able to prompt the AI and then train it in the correct way to get that response. But it's certainly doable.
So you mentioned prompt there, and you have to know how to use it. And this kind of goes back to, I believe it was Lance's questions about change management. So I guess overtly wanting to say, like, if you have a very, very real use case that you vetted and been very transparent with your staff about why you're doing it, what efficiencies you want to gain, how this is not going to necessarily eliminate their job, but how it's going to free them up to have a more meaningful employment experience, you can kind of work through the change management. But we had this when AMSs came out, when comparative raters came out, when Excel came out, right? We were all talking about things that were supposed to create scaled efficiency. But prompts are an interesting thing. And I'm kind of zigzagging here, but I was in a dialogue yesterday where a fairly large, like top 100-esque organization was talking about how internally they're training their staff on prompting and viewing their internal prompts almost as IP, as intellectual property. So especially
that's a great, interesting way to put that. And it's a very, it's a really good indication for me that AI is just, it's not to the place where we're going to see it sort of taking over humanity. Like it's still very much receptive and relies upon the type of prompting that you're doing with it and the training.
Well, and the specificity of, of the question too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot too. I know there's a question around places to go get training on prompting. You could probably ask ChatGPT for some of those things.
You can ask it where to train. Google actually has a really great, they have a great course, and a lot of them are free online too, to just run through. Where's the other one? Udemy. I don't know if you guys have ever used that. Like some of those open source learning tools, there's a lot of content on there on how to prompt and how to get the response you need, and they're free.
And so Mary, you asked that question. So Joseph Cox, who's one of the marketing professionals here at Big I with the Trusted Choice team, he's been really good at kind of giving me some insights because, they're really diving into how to think about AI and the tools that Trusted Choice built and even just their own learning. And we're kind of collaborating on some AI tools. But he said something that was fascinating with me is pivoting in your mind from prompting AI like you would do a Google search to treating it like you're having a conversation. So you can type in the prompt, it will give you back something. It may or may not be exactly what you're looking for, and just say, hey, thank you. Now, can you twist it this way? I'm looking for you to elaborate on that. And it will literally evolve its conversation.
You have to continue, usually in my experience, to get to the real thing that I'm looking for, if I'm using an AI, a generative AI, it's like you ask it, and I've learned over time. So now when I start asking it questions, it's a little bit of a paragraph. It's like, here's what I want. Here's the tone I want, you're giving it the prompts as you go. But yeah, I almost think about like talking to like a 5-year-old. This is gonna sound mean to the AI. I'm sorry, AI, I love you. But like, you would like how you would want, if you wanted something to come out of your 5-year-old, like how would you describe that to them, and how would you get that response to them? It's very literal. So that's good. AI is going to take everything very literal. Where if you think about Google search now has gotten so good, and I don't want to harp on Google. I guess you could Bing or whatever else is out there. I'm a Google girl, but you can type in my case, like I can type in the thing written wrong and spelled 5 ways wrong, and it's still going to give me the thing that I'm looking for on the search, right? AI is much more literal, and you really have to lay out what you're looking for. And you also kind of, from time to time, you'll need to like check your answers as well. That's the other thing we don't really talk about with AI. Like there is such thing as hallucination. Like AI will make up things that aren't necessarily accurate. And so, you always kind of want to prompt to check for those things as well.
Yeah, that's, I appreciate you bringing up the hallucinations and, continuing
to real. It's real.
Continue to talk about the prompts. One of the things, and not with full insight as to who all is out here, so I apologize if this is, a little bit, is something you might have heard before. But I think it's really important when we're thinking about AI, particularly in these language models, where most everybody's now getting their first dosage through ChatGPT or some of these similar models, and then figuring out how to deploy it. All these models are really sophisticated statistical predictions of what the model thinks the next word a human being would choose, based on it consuming everything that's available on the global internet or whatever sort of sandbox you build around it. And so I was actually giving a presentation about AI a few months ago, and we were talking about one of the more famous or infamous, I suppose, AI hallucinations was the defense attorney who used ChatGPT to write the defense brief, turn it into the judge, and the judge was not familiar with the cited cases. And it turned out ChatGPT literally just made up cases.
Made it up. Yeah. Citing is a thing I've seen with the open ChatGPT as a problem, like citing sources and getting information that way. That seems to be a place they need to improve. So just note that if you're using it.
Yeah. And so like this person in the room, and I talk about this because I think it's a way of thinking about prompt and to support your take of really review this stuff, regardless of how you're using it. But a gentleman in the back of the room really kind of perked up. He goes, well, how are we going to stop it from lying? And I was like, wow, that's a really deep philosophical question, because the human being, it's lying. It was wrong, but it wasn't necessarily lying because it doesn't even have that context, right? And so
it doesn't have the context for that yet. Yep.
And I think 100%. To Cindy's point, maybe even the point that perhaps Claire was getting to around E&O, I not an attorney, whatever. This is just Chris Cline talking. I think consuming anything as is out of an AI model without deep scrutiny or human scrutiny and double checking it and making sure that it's at the very minimum in your brand voice. It says what you would want it to say. It's offering recommendations that are along the way that your agency standards might be. That's a fundamental flaw. And so a lot of organizations are actually locking down AI usage for their employees until they build these protocols.
Their own internal. Well, that's smart, because obviously, people, I'm sure they all know now and have heard it, but anything you put into Chat GPT is public knowledge. Yeah. So, private companies, obviously you want to do that, and you can, most companies at this point now are building their own models that are private, that are not part of that. But it is a little scary to think about, and that's, to me, honestly, why I caution agents to do anything that's AI client facing yet, because of E&O exposure, right? Like, you don't want anybody interfacing with an AI that's telling them about coverage directly or suggesting coverage, or I don't think AI is to the point where that would be something I would want to do hands off, right? Like letting that interface directly with a client. Some people have done it. It's terrifying to me, but that's not where I would choose. Instead, as an agency owner, I would choose to use a generative AI knowledge database to help maybe a newer agent ask about coverage in general. Like, what is this coverage, right? Like
a turbocharged intranet of some kind.
Like it for an internal, and actually at IRYS internally, we are feeding our own internal models, our own internal documentation to help with support, right? So that we can turn that loose and help and have that, but again, that is, if you're looking at they're the same use case, but they're just slightly different, meaning, we're not exposing one to the direct client. We're using it operationally in training or knowledge center so that we can make agents faster and a little bit smarter when they're dealing with the general public. And I think that's a key differentiation in how you would use that. Same tool, different application.
And so I think that's, again, another conversation that kind of prompts two different things. So back to the question around how will an E&O policy respond? I think the best advice is for an agency and their legal staff to be proactive with whoever their E&O provider is and try to understand that and get insight from your E&O provider. I mean, I might have some
always
opinion.
Default back to E&O, although I've seen, it's, wildly speculating, but looking at, some of the things that I've seen come across social too is I don't think E&O carriers are going to eat that one, guys. Not yet. I think that you're probably going to be doing this at your own peril for a little while. There's still a lot of standards. There's still a lot of legislation that is just non-existent right now around that. And there's not a lot of precedent for, these types of, slip ups with AI. So, you're kind of doing it at your own risk right now. And I think if you go into it knowing that, like, if you're okay with that, and that this exposure is probably going to be on you as the company, and there's not going to be a lot of safety nets around it, and you're okay with that, then go for it. But until that comes around, I would be careful with, saying, oh, my AI told me to do it as a good defense.
One thing, another one too. And again, these are a couple folks. I mean, I worked in adjacent to this capacity in my time on the carrier with a carrier, but state licensing and appointment regulations, I think, are also sort of a hazy area when it comes to AI. Most states have some obligation that a human being needs to be licensed to service, negotiate, or solicit insurance. And when things get funky, very case specific, what happened? What were the circumstances? What was the advice? Who does the customer think they were told by to do what? And what did they do as a result of that advice? I mean, these are the kind of things. So E&O may or may not become an issue, at least on the day. But I mean, there just could be some very weird licensing stuff. And unfortunately, it may take something kind of seismic to happen for
Most of the
something
time
to
it does, right?
for the press sort of
Yeah.
regulation in that. But, and to specific to your comment about using it internally, Margeaux, and then Claire, I think you're asking a question along these lines is now once it's internally, there are paid versions of ChatGPT where you can build your own data set.
Yep.
And that way now your team or your staff or whatever you're trying, it's learning off of what you want it to learn from, not what, hackers and spammers and everything else that's out on the social media. The downside to that, first of all, that's a strong piece of advice and directional advice, I believe, for any organization. Internal only, kind of build your own data set.
For now, please.
Comma, but with the benefit of the entire global internet, ChatGPT still makes errors.
Yes.
So
we
it
talked
takes
about
a lot
this.
of data and a lot of accurate data to get there. And so I want you to talk about that a little bit. And then even outside the AI models, just the muscle and discipline it takes to have very consistent processes and practices that are audible, coached and mentored and trained just to make your data good in the first place.
Yeah, that's two really big topics. So I'll tackle I'll tackle the AI in general and the data set that it needs. I mean, to put this in perspective, ChatGPT 3 came out and it was trained on the entirety of the human history on the internet. Okay. And it was still wild. If you guys played with it in the beginning, it was still wild, right? Like it was very, and it still is. So, I think we need to, as agents and even in the insurance space in general, we need to be a little bit more realistic about the type of outcomes that we're going to get from AI with the data that we have available today to train on it. And I would encourage people to do a little bit of research on just how much data it takes to train an AI model. You are not going to feed an AI model, your company handbook that's 100 pages and the Oracle Delphi guys. Like it takes a lot of data to train. And you can, like I said, you can look at the biggest carriers and underwriters and reinsurance companies in the world. They're paying billions of dollars for data to train AI models to do things that, in a more narrow scope world of agents, we think, oh, it should just magically appear. It should just happen. Like, no, there are large forces at play to get these types of outcomes that we're seeing kind of paraded right now as like the perfect, right? Like I see a lot of advertising around AI and how it's going to do all of these things. And with IRYS, you'll see us say AI, but I don't like to hinge on the AI, right? Because that's not the end all be all of the process. But I think we also need to temper our expectations of what it can deliver today and what it is going to take to deliver anything that's worthwhile for an agency. And that, again, to your point, Chris, is going to be sheer amount of data, the sheer amount of data you need to train it. The accuracy of that data, like where it's coming from. A lot of in the agency space, and I'm guilty of this too, we like to let clients sort of dictate, well, the client said that it's this, and the client said the roof is this. And like, you got to be a lot more careful about the accuracy of those things when you're trying to invoke something like AI and you're training it, because at the end of the day, it will give you what you put into it. And if you put bias data, if you put inaccurate data, if you don't have data stewardship, then the output of that is going to be just as negative. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a big, everybody's really excited about it, and I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but at the end of the day, to truly execute AI, like you're talking about, Chris, in a secure way where you're training your own models and you're not using data sets that you're not familiar with, that is private, that's, going to fit into the box where, as an operational agency or corporation, you should be utilizing AI. It is not a small undertaking. It's probably not a cheap undertaking, and you do need to be committed to training it and working with it over time for the outcome. And so that means the broader you try to make that use case for your AI, the less likely it is you're going to succeed. So narrow your scope and what you're trying to get it to accomplish is probably going to be the best way for you to then step into a larger, broader use of AI.
Yeah, and the whole data thing, I think, is a massive conversation and a critical conversation, whether you ever say the word AI again.
Yeah.
For a lot of things, just basic marketing and sales and hiring practices.
I mean,
and assessing
AI or automated emails or, any type of machine learning, or any type of RPA, like all of it requires that one, the data exists in the first place. And I talk about this a lot with agencies, especially that are on more of the personal line side. The typical workflow of a personal lines agency is if you're thinking about using AI, you are going to have to change the way you think and work and do. Because if you are talking to a client and going directly into a comparative rater and then hopping into a carrier portal and then letting a download populate your AMS, you have no data. Like you have no data. You've relinquished your data to all of those individual places. There's no aggregation of it. And then you're relying on a regurgitated version of your data through the telephone game to populate your AMS, which is typically, or I don't want to say AMS because sometimes it's just your system of record, whatever that system of record is. And that is so common in personal lines shops because, Chris, of the duplicative data entry. Because they don't want to put it in one place and then have to go to another place and type the same thing in and type it in again. So in order to it's this convoluted thing, but in order to solve that problem, you have to fix that workflow before you can even start talking about AI.
Yeah, or exactly any of those things. And then it's that exact scenario is exacerbated if you're an agency that has made any acquisitions.
Yes.
You've bought a book when you hired a producer. You're bringing all of that historical sort of nuance in the data. And so there are companies out there, a couple of them are phenomenal ACT partners as well, that are phenomenal at data cleaning up and cleansing and truing up your data now. But I think the point to what you were trying to make is without really strong internal process change and role clarity and who's going to do what and why, and being really crisp about the data standards that you just paid a lot of money to get fixed, it's already out of date tomorrow if you don't have.
It's not even out of date. It's not even there. It's not even there. Yeah. It's like, I'm seeing so many, they're in the carrier portal. Like, how do you access that? How do you digitize? How do you clean that? You can't, because it's not even, you don't even have it anymore. You're relinquishing that entire part of your business. Not to mention if someone calls in the interim between when they've talked to somebody in your sales department and they bind the policy, if there's any time that lapses in there, how are you managing that? Or what carrier portal did you put it in? Or what rater did it go to? Or what line of it? Like, there's so much around that whole process. But I think the key there is that you can buy data cleanliness. You can buy, aggregators and MDMs and all of that. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the data, if you don't own the data, if it's not something that's sitting somewhere digitally that you can collect, you can't even get to that point.
Yeah, yes. It's a conversation we should do a follow-up to this on.
We should do a whole, why your data is so important. It's your whole business and it's everything that you need to live your life.
Yeah, I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole.
Don't touch that one. That one's that's a whole nother podcast, StreamYard.
But it is important, right? And this just keeps coming back to what operational things are you trying to solve? And this might sound completely sacrilegious, is that even when you find a pain point, my advice today is, or at least a way to think about this is, back to reframing the question. If you ask somebody what AI you need, they will sell you AI.
Whatever is on their docket. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And it's, if you walk into Lowe's and just say, I need tools, without any idea of what project you're going to do and your personal capabilities and being able to use the tools, hopefully they ask you what you're trying to work on. But an unscrupulous person is going to walk you right over to the power tool thing and back your car up and fill it full of stuff you can't use. And I know that's sort of a hyperbolic metaphor, but I think it's really true.
It's accurate.
Start with what your pain points are. Involve your staff. What are they struggling with? And make sure that there's as little gap between the excitement, the enthusiasm of what the leadership is trying to get done, and what the team is really dealing with every single day. You learn a lot.
That is such a gap. And when we talk through strategy, that I personally have seen now doing implementations for a long time before IRYS, and then implementing IRYS, and we would go in and we talk through the disconnect between management and employee in the agency space is not something I don't think we talk about enough. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it, but at the end of the day, it's just like any other corporation. They have different needs. Management has different needs out of a tool, a platform, a software than the person, answering the phone has. And the skill in that is, well, how do you marry the two, right? And I think we've seen historically a lot of times with tech, they build towards the buyer. And like, we could do a whole other podcast on this, but like, a lot of times tech is built towards the buyer, and this is not different with AI. It's built towards the decision maker. So I need to do the shiny thing for the CFO or the CIO because they're the one that's going to say yes or no. And their needs come before, possibly and most likely, that person who just got hired that's, answering phones at a call center. And I think this is like, society right now is actually going through this shift where we're going back and forth and asking, is that actually the right way to handle company culture, to handle strategy? And as Emma Roloff will tell you, how to handle a digital transformation, even a small one, like adding an AI tool in. Like, these are things that we talk about strategy that you really have to go back and understand. And as leaders in agencies, yes, our needs are important and we like the shiny things. But at the end of the day, operational efficiency is going to hinge and rely on the people at the very end of that chain being able to do their job effectively and being happy at their job, wanting to come to work, having the tools they need to do their job, completely. In insurance, attracting new talent and keeping new talent, it's incredibly expensive for agency owners, myself included, to spend money on someone for 6 months to train them up, to have them to leave, to go not be in insurance anymore. That is something that agency owners are feeling every day, that management is feeling, and they're not necessarily drawing the correlation that the clicks to, create a policy, it could be driving that.
Yeah.
And so there's there's a connection that needs to be made between the strategy and the upper management and their roles, but then also to the people that are in the seats that end up having to Lance's point earlier, adopt this technology and use it. And a lot of times I think insurance is a little jaded because a lot of softwares came out, point solutions came out and said, we're going to save their life. Everybody's going to be so happy, only to end up fixing one problem to create a downstream problem for the CSR, for the agent that now has to click through 70 screens or make an additional, round trip to get that done. It satisfied their needs, but at the end of the day, it actually created more problems. And so when you get into that situation, that's when you see adoption tank. And that connection needs to be made, whether it's AI or any other software you're bringing on board.
Yeah, it's important. It's super important. It's probably another podcast too, but I mean, even just know when we were chatting about what we talk about today, change management culture and these kind of things are just critical conversations to be having, whether it's AI or whether we're talking about agencies or carriers. I mean, this is like super heady best practice stuff with with running any business. And I've always tried to start with a premise that all of us as employees, even the CEO that has a board or somebody that is accountable to, is
always
just really wants to know what they're supposed to be doing each day, have some relatively clear expectations, how they're going to be assessed, and have the tools to do that. And the gap you talk about, and again, this is not an indictment on agencies only, but having the shiny object on the shelf to say that, hey, we're using A, B, or C, if the staff's not doing it, I think, is a real opportunity to get focused up on. And I think whether it's any tech, starting there, and if more than one person shares the same job description, getting them synced up on doing the job as consistently and as each other may eliminate the need to do a whole lot of other stuff.
Well, the whole title of this is what AI do I need? And my first response would be, well, ask your employees. Like, get it out of what you need. Like, what
Yeah.
what are they doing all day long that you could assist them with? That start with that problem, and then tie it back to a larger strategy as a company, right?
Mhm.
That we're gonna embrace. Like, this is the year we're gonna embrace, change. We're gonna go to a different market. Like, so we say tying that back to a strategy, and then going back to your agents and your CSRs. And I always say CSRs because I feel like like those people, the very last end of that value chain that you just brought on, they're doing all the keying and typing. Like, please talk to them too. They need to be bought into whatever AI tool you're going to bring on. It's almost like that needs to be the first step that you take in the process, is talking to your staff about and creating a culture where your staff feels comfortable really telling you the right answer. That's another, that's a whole other podcast we can get into, is like, effectively communicating, but being able to get your staff involved in identifying the problem and then helping find the solution well before you buy it and roll it out is so critical, especially with AI, because of the sensitivity around, like you said, Chris, earlier, people being concerned that this is going to replace their job, right? That they're not going to be needed anymore, or having staff that's not familiar, they don't use ChatGPT in their daily life. This is very scary for them. Like, all of that needs to be taken into consideration and tied back to a strategy. But those people have to be involved, I would say, from the very beginning of that process, if you want to make sure adoption is smooth.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, what better way to create buy-in and adoption with the staff is to have them be a part of really identifying the pain points and maybe even the opportunities, and maybe even the selection process for what tools are used, and driving
The most
change.
successful implementations I've ever seen were the ones that we had the largest amount of the staff involved in the process well before signing and implementing.
Well, let's do this. We've got 7 or 8 minutes left on our dedicated time here. I think we've covered some operational thoughts and concerns and risks, and really kind of hammered home some ways to think about when AI might even be right, before you dive into AI. But not to be even remotely controversial, but AI in a lot of places is sort of a philosophical belief polarizer as well. And so I have talked to people that fundamentally don't want to use it because they don't believe in it for a variety of reasons, right? And it doesn't take very many clicks. And I'm guilty of these, not guilty because I love them, the rabbit holes that you can go down listening to
like
Sam
Wikipedia, like forever. Yes, love it.
And Ray Kurzweil talking to Joe Rogan, where you can get to a point where all of the fears that Lance might have been alluding to can become reality. And in fact, what it was 5-6 months ago, Elon, Sam Altman, and then the father of DeepMind at Google all sort of helped co-author a letter that essentially said AI needs to be put on the same plateau as pandemic and nuclear war as an existential threat. So this is driving some people's beliefs in your business today. If we were to fast forward 3 to 5 years, Margeaux Giles, how much will it, in your mind, change our industry?
It will unequivocally alter the industry. I think we're still in the phase of how it does that. I know that there are people working diligently on trying to make sure that it doesn't go rampant, trying to make sure that it stays within, the confines of where it belongs. I mean, personally, it's a little scary for me. I've seen some AI do some things that I'm like, I'm not really comfortable with that. I don't know how comfortable I feel about that. And again, there's still conceptual things, but there are, and it's something that we actually are working on internally at IRYS about, there's a lot of people that are harping on, ethical use of data, ethical, consensual use of AI. I think we'll see a whole bunch of discussion around that as AI evolves. There's going to be a lot of discussion. I'm very guilty of this, of leading the charge here, but who owns what data and how it's used and why it's used and what model it's used in? And as a person, am I giving you the right to use? If I'm using the iPhone, if I'm calling my agent and I'm giving you personal data, do you have the right to then use that data in your AI model? There's going to be a lot of discussion around that in the next 3 to 5 years. I don't think it's anything where it's going to be, oh my God, the sky is falling. But I think most of it will see a significant shift towards those regulatory discussions that you were talking about. I think we're going to see a lot of the spin up AI companies that really didn't have good business models, that were kind of out there collecting a quick buck. I think we're going to see spin down of that over the next 3 to 5 years. And I think we're going to see the practical use cases of AI being wrapped into larger platforms. But there will be a significant shift. And I've said this before, prior to AI and prior to the availability of this kind of technology widespread, you might be able to do operational efficiency 20% or 30% better than your competitor. We're getting ready to enter into a place where, if utilized correctly and trained correctly, AI could potentially be an omnipresent workforce that never sleeps, that never eats, right? And so I don't think we're going to see just the 10 to 20% difference over the next 5 years as far as who's harnessing it and what their output is going to be. I think that will be very disparate. So not the sky is falling, but it's certainly not insignificant. It's something that I think all agency owners need to keep their eyes on.
Yeah, I respect that. And it was almost sort of a tempered way of answering that, that question. But I think baked in what you said is that there's that old adage that we tend to sort of overestimate how quickly something will happen and underestimate its impact.
Yes.
And the asterisk on that statement, at least through my lens, is, and again, I might be completely victimized by some of the rabbit hole conversations that I've allowed my to go to, but I think about AI, and I think some of the big, most significant thinkers on the globe are putting it on the same level as when humankind invented the wheel and discovered fire, and then we go through the industrial revolution.
It is on that level. Think about the acceleration of what tech will be built on top of AI, right? Of what will be possible now that we have that. I think we won't really even know just the we can speculate now on the easy stuff, like, contract is one, and medical implications and insurance implications. But I think there'll be, if I'm thinking of it, I'm attending these, blockchain and these AI conferences that I've been doing recently. I think we're going to see a lot of like kind of what I was saying, that personalization of that, like, are there digital twins of me, and what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like, we get into that sort of, yep. Are there AI bots being trained on my buying habits that are, Google's using to sell something? Like, these are things that are happening, that are in practice, yeah, and that are coming. And it's certainly something you should be keeping your eye on.
Well, that's it. And I think the pace is part of it, right? I mean, some of those things we talked about, fire and the wheel was centuries, the Industrial Revolution was decades, and we're measuring advancements in AI in weeks and months. So yeah, it's important to pay attention to. And kind of wrapping up, I think inherent in all of this as well is there's not going to be a day where a bomb goes off and there's a whole lot of jobs gone, but the compressed timeline and the evolution of roles changing rapidly, I think that what makes this very different than even the kind of the early days of Insurtech and even the .com bubble were, I don't know that we can even comprehend what new roles and what new capabilities may be right in front of us. And it'll cause us, as you talked about, to think about who does what, who owns what data, which roles get paid to do certain parts of this task. I mean, $1 premium can only be sliced in so many different ways. And it's not intended to be scary, but it is really a strong encouragement as we close for everybody to make sure you got an eye put on this and to understand it. Go to events.
Keep learning about it. Yep. Keep researching it. Keep asking these questions. Keep coming to AI webinars. Like the people that can harness it and the people that can understand it are going to be the ones I think that come out in the end.
Yep. And none of us are experts, right? There's just levels of
nobody.
Of
We're all learning.
We're all learning. So meet a lot of people, have a lot of conversations, form your own opinions, and most of all, stay well. And definitely want to stop right now, say thank you to you, Margeaux. It was great. Gosh, great conversation. Clearly, we could have gone on forever. Thanks to IRYS for supporting ACT and the independent agents and the channel at large. And thanks to everybody that took time out of your day to join.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye.